Good evening, everybody. I'm Tim. I'm the minister in charge here. If ever there was a day I want you to open the Bibles that are on your tables or near to hand, it would be great to do that. We're going to look at a particular parable that I think over the years has been misused, and we're hopefully going to get a new slant on it today. So if you could grab hold of them, so just to prove I'm not like lying halfway through, I suddenly say something that isn't in there. That would be great. So Matthew 25, starting to read at verse 14. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received the 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with 2 talents gained 2 more. But the man who had received only 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received the 5 talents bought the other 5. "Master," he said, "you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more." His master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." The man who had 2 talents also came. "Master," he said, "you entrusted me with 2 talents. See, I have gained 2 more." His master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." Then the man who had received 1 talent came. "Master," he said, "I knew you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you." The master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who had 10 talents. For everyone who has been given more, and he will. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even though he has not taken from him, and throw the worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." There we go. So we're going to do 3 things today. We're going to re-look at this passage. We're going to look at the traditional reading of it very briefly, and then we're going to do a slant on it that I think basically makes the traditional reading of this passage redundant. Yes, I'm going as far as to say if you do the traditional reading of this passage, it is wrong. So hold on to your horse. If you're happy, feel free to disagree with me. I'm more than happy. I'm bigger than you. So let's face it, it'll end in tears for you. And bear in mind the final verses of "You'll be thrown out, you worthless servant." No, feel free to disagree. I'm more than happy to disagree with. Second thing we're going to do, we're going to look very briefly at Leviticus 1 to 6 and how that passage sets the bar of interaction with giving that is throughout the Bible, and I would contend even today stands true. And then finally, we're going to look at our commitment as Oak Tree, as our commitment for me and Lauren, and I think the commitment for the whole of us to you as individuals, to you as families, to you as somebody who wants to maybe even interested in joining Oak Tree. We're going to kind of look at our commitment to you. So, open your Bibles to where we are, page 994, the traditional reading of this passage. Now, last week, we had a very similar passage in Luke's Gospel that Ruth read to us. Now, I would contend that there is a history of Jesus kind of, I would say, using parables more than once in different ways. And I would say the Luke passage is used differently because the context is different. If you read this passage using the parable of the talents, I would say it's a different time, different context, therefore different interpretation. But the traditional reading of this passage is that actually somebody some landowner who's God gives out this money to 3 different characters, different amounts. He goes away. Two of them do a really good job of investing the money and getting more back. The guy returns, gets some money. Well done. You've made loads of money. That's great. Well done to you, first person. Second one, you've made a bit of money, not as much as the first one, but you've made money. Well done. To shake your hand, you've got lots of things that will bless you. And finally, we get the kind of entrance stage right of man number 3, who did nothing with it. In fact, he dug a hole, put it in, covered it over, and when he came back, dug it up again, and then his money back. So we have the traditional reading of it is that actually we all have money, we might extend the reading of this and go, we all have talents we can use in church, and we should use our money and our talents as God would want us to use them. Have some of us heard that type of reading, how this has been used before? Yeah. Yes. Excellent. You might have even been as far as, and it kind of raised its head quite a few years ago, and our Jake was in infant school, and the local vicar came in and basically handed out fivers to the whole school and said, right, your job is to make money, and they're making a very worthy cause. It's some water aid or something. And the kids went out, and our Jake came home and went, right, I want to do this. And I think he bought a load of bloom modelling kits and made bloom modelling for kids' parties and all that stuff. And he made loads. He made about 30 quid on top of the fiver that was invested. And I'm thinking, is that really what God has called us to do? To basically kind of be capitalist, really? Kind of invest, accumulate, get more. And I was aware, okay, I'm a slight lefty at the best of times. And is it just that I'm this kind of slightly left-wing reading, that I'm a bit insecure that the Bible is being used that way? Or is there another way of reading it? So we have this kind of idea that there might be something more going on. So non-traditional reading of this passage. We've got to get our heads round 2 problems first. First one already highlighted. Does Jesus say anywhere else in the Bible that we should, that we should make loads of money for God? Does anybody aware of that? No? Okay. Second thing that I struggle with as part of this passage, if you look, verse 24. It's haphazard. I don't normally preach from notes like this, and we were up late last night with the cat thing, and yeah, bear with me. So the second problem we have with the traditional reading is in verse 24, and it's the third man's observation of God, of the man who gives out the money. The man who then received the 1 talent said, Master, he said, I knew you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. Now, what's he describing? He's describing the master, who we're reading as God. What's he actually describing him as, though? I knew you were a hard man. You're harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you've not scattered seed. What's that describing? A thief. Okay, can anybody remember a time where God's described as a thief? Anybody? No. Oh, yep. Like a thief in the night, yes, excellent. I knew somebody had come up with it, brilliant. Now we'll come back to that one in later on. But there is only one time he's like a thief in the night. It's, to use the big word, it's eschatological. That is end times, okay? But in any reality, all the way through the Bible, God isn't described as somebody who steals. I have a problem with this character who sees God as a thief. If our traditional reading is that it's about money and talents. Now, either the guy in the story isn't God, or it's not about money, and it's not about talents as what we can do in the service. So we're going to run through a non-traditional reading of this passage. Now, bear in mind the talent. If you do any type of research into this, there's various different theories as to how much a talent is worth. But the bottom line is, it's a lot of money for them. Okay? It isn't just here's a fiver. It's actually loads of money. They're entrusted with something that is beyond their own understanding and comprehension. They're slaves. We know that in this parable. So to give them any money is a big thing, but to give them loads and lashings of money and to do something with it is just incomprehensible to these characters. So is it really about money, or is there something else going on? Is there an occasion where somebody who doesn't understand God can see what God does and go, that's theft, isn't it? Now, in the non-traditional reading of this passage, I would contend Jesus is talking about grace. He's talking about an act that is totally incomprehensible to anybody who doesn't know God. The idea that God can come down to this earth and go, actually, I'm going to take your sins. I'm going to take your sins. That somebody who on their deathbed could have this amazing experience of God and go, I want that relationship with God. That their whole life could be dedicated to just theft and injustice and any type of sin you can think of. And on their deathbed, they turn to God and God forgives them. Their whole life has been invested in sin. But at the last, Jesus steals their life to the kingdom of God. The parable is about the end times. If you set it in the context of of what's going on in and around it, beyond the chapter itself, you got the parable of the 10 virgins. That idea that Jesus is the groom and that the virgins don't really have a clue and they've got to pay catch up as to Jesus coming back. You wind it back a bit more, you've got the day and the hour is unknown. You get further on in there, you get the sheep and the goats. So Jesus is describing the end times when people are called to account for what they have done, and more importantly, what they have not done. So let's look at the passage again with this idea that talent isn't money, isn't something we can do, but is something that God gives us. If we read it again with that idea that God gives us grace, we suddenly understand why the final guy does what he reacts like he does. So the first one takes the 5 talents and goes invests it, he spreads it wide, and more comes in. He gets given grace because he has sinned so much. God has to give him more grace. What does the guy do? He goes and spreads it around and more comes back in. The second guy, probably not as sinful as the last one, but actually is forgiven and he's given grace and he goes and takes it and runs with it and spreads it around and more comes back. Not as much as the first one, but still a lot comes back. The final guy is given grace and does nothing with it. Absolutely nothing with it. In fact, he takes it away, puts it in a hole in the ground and covers it over. If we read it like that, can we now see Jesus' response and understand it? Jesus' response in verse 28 in this parable to the guy who does nothing with grace. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Final verse. And throw him, that worthless servant, outside into the darkness where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Suddenly you understand why that landowner responds like that, because the final guy does nothing with grace. If we read this passage with that in mind, it's not about money, it's not about talents, it's about our response to what God has given us. Suddenly we have a window to what our response should be. And it leaves us with the question, the really quite deep question and challenging one of, so what are we doing with the grace that God has extended to us? That's the first point. Second point we're going to look at today is looking how Leviticus can help us in our giving. If you can turn to page 103. Leviticus chapter 1. We're just going to pick 2 verses, but this is a kind of principle that goes all the way through Leviticus. This idea that giving is accessible to everybody. Okay? That's the pauper on the street, through to the incredibly rich landowner. Giving is accessible. Leviticus chapter 1, verse 2, second half of verse 2. Bring as your offering an animal from either the herd or the flock. That's a bull or a sheep. One's more expensive than the other. You fast forward to verse 14. If the offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, he is to offer a dove or a young pigeon. A dove is more expensive than a pigeon. So we have categories of gifts. We have a bull, we have a sheep or a goat, and we have a dove or a pigeon. They kind of go in a scale. So giving is not dependent. Well, it's not dependent upon economic position, because whoever you are, you could go and find a pigeon to sacrifice. It's about where your heart is. At the same time, if you're really rich, more is expected of you. If you're really rich, you don't bring a dove and a pigeon. If you're really rich, you bring a cow, because more is expected of you. The giving is the most important bit. The bull costs more than the pigeon. It's interesting that actually, if you read in later on about the Day of Atonement in Leviticus, that actually that giving is accessible for everybody. It extends into kids. Okay, now bear with me on this; it's a bit gruesome, but actually the extent is the kids. So on the run up to the Day of Atonement, the guys in charge of the family brings little Fluffy the lamb to live with the kids in the house for 2 weeks, running up to when they're going to sacrifice it. So they probably name the lamb. It lives in the house. The kids play with the lamb. They befriend the lamb. They feed him. They probably stroke him a little bit. They might even kind of just brush it a little bit. The gift extends to even costing the children, because 2 weeks later they've got to give that lamb as a sacrifice. So it not only costs the dad out of their earnings, it's going to cost the kids, because they've invested in this little Fluffy, or whatever they're going to call the sheep. It extends to the kids as well. Now, we can over-spiritualize it a little bit and go, well, it's true that actually that part of the guidelines on the giving, it can't be a lamb with any broken bones. And actually you can extend that into the crucifixion. His legs weren't broken. And so that's a metaphor for Jesus dying on the cross. But at the same time, one of the practices in shepherding in first century in the Middle East was that if they had a sheep that kept wandering off, a little lamb that bounced off on its own, they used to get the sheep, they used to break its leg, bind it up a little bit, and carry it with the shepherd for a few days until it could walk again. The idea being that then the lamb used to follow the shepherd around and not wander off. But when it comes to sacrificing something, which lamb are you going to pick? The one with the duff leg, all right? Because it's not going to bring as much at the market, is it? But no, the cost has got to cost you. The economics of giving are accessible to the rich and to the poor. So, point number 1, giving is our response to an immeasurable gift of grace to us. Secondly, giving is accessible to all. If you're rich, more will be expected of you. If you're poor, you've still got to give. What does it mean to you? Finally, giving is 2 ways. What do we as a church are expected to give you in response to your gift? First and foremost, when I started here, I wanted to build into a rhythm of prayer that we are committed to pray for you. That's morning prayer, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in here, 7 o'clock in the morning. Tuesday and Thursday at 9:30 in here. On Tuesdays at St. Mary's at 9:30 in the morning. We're committed to pray for you. There's a prayer list that goes around. We're committed to want to know what's going on in your life so we can hold it up to God and see miracles. Secondly, our commitment as a church to you is to care for you. That actually in the walk we have in our lives, sometimes things don't go as well as we want. And the ministries we have at this church have been set up as a response to that. That's CAP, that's food bank. At times, things are hard. We are committed to walking with you through that. I was at last night the CAP fundraising dinner, and there's a lady on the video who said this is the most amazing thing. She goes, I was literally dying. I encountered God, I encountered CAP, and now I am flying again. I am flying again. The thing that really got me, she goes, my kids trust me again now. That is what we're committed to you to be a church that cares for you, a church that prays for you, and thirdly, a church that inspires you to succeed, to enjoy life, to want to see you grow. I don't want to be in a position where I meet with you, I pray for you, talk whatever I want to talk to you about. I want to leave you in a better place than I met you through the ministry of this church. There's already 3 people, I've only been here 6 months, there's 3 people exploring the idea of possibly going to have some type of kind of theological training. It's very early days, but the discussion's there. I want to see people grow and expand and be challenged. In the next few months at ACC, that's like the kind of governing body of our church, we're going to be looking at developing the idea of interns. We're going to be discussing that. Would it be the best benefit for this church? I think it might be, and we're going to discuss that. We're going to look at the possibility of maybe even having another church service here. All of this costs money. All of this raises a bar of expectation of what we want to do with you on this walk of this care for Oak Tree, for you as a family and to you as an individual. Finally, if you can dig out the adverts for Christmas that are on the table. Finally, as a church, we want to help you tell your own story. That's your own story of how grace has encountered you. I want you to go away thinking, I want to spread the grace around. And this is a great time to do this at Christmas. We have fantastic services, all of them pointing towards Christmas and pointing towards a gospel that we want to share. On the 4th of December, we have a contemporary carol service. Now, this isn't a contemporary carol service as in, see him lying on a bed of straw. It's not that type of contemporary carols, okay? Just to give you... What are you laughing at? I was in tune at the very least. Thank you. The contemporary carol service is structured in such a way we take songs from the year and carols and sing them and weave in a story of grace and a story of Christmas. A couple of the songs we'll be using, Emily, what's her name? Emily Sandé's song. We're going to be singing and performing Guns N' Roses' song. Yes. There are other songs that will be going through telling this story, helping you spread this message of grace. We have Christmas market carols. Be there and sing and share this message of grace. Christmas Unplugged. This is like kind of downplayed, chill out kind of songs and carols being sung and a message of Jesus. We have a Christingle service with the oranges and the candles and the toasted dolly mixtures that you can, and all of it helping you tell this story of grace. That is our responsibility, our commitment to you as a family and as an individual. So our commitment for you to be part of Oak Tree is to pray for you, to care for you, to not leave you the same as when we first met, to inspire you to move on in your walk with God, to be with you through the good and the bad, and finally to help you tell your own story of how you can be a priest at your home, at your school, and in your work. But when it comes down to it, all of this costs money and time and prayer. Spiritually, I had a really clear challenge for me to share a word that somebody here is tired of standing on the sideline. That actually, spiritually, we want to walk with you and inspire you and move you on. And if you're here and you're thinking, I've been kind of standing on the bench too long, I want to play a fuller part in my walk with God, please come and talk to me afterwards. And practically, yes, it does need money to fund food bank, to fund another service, to possibly look at interns. It needs money, it needs prayer, it needs commitment. All of it outlined in the folded over leaflets that are on your table if you want to know more details. But before we go on, we have somebody far better, far more talented and gifted in explaining finances. Andrew, come on up.